finale to a video game can sometimes be an important factor in said game. This is because you'll want a good note to end a good game on, and because it's usually the last thing you remember in a game. So if a game's finale is really cruddy, that's not necessarily going to ruin the game, but you'll be left with a very insulted and empty feeling. In case some people are expecting the ending to Mass Effect 3, I haven't played it. And one more thing. I may have some very controversial opinions on this list, so be warned. So anyways, time to go through this. The first entry is actually an entry I really want to like, but it ends up being rather lackluster. I don't hate it with a passion like some of the later entries on the list, but here we go. After you beat the Alpine skyline, the mustache girl who helped you at the beginning of the game makes her way to your spaceship. She breaks into the vault and steals every timepiece that you worked hard to get so that she can put an end to all the bad guys. But she thinks that everyone is evil, and as a result, the world gets turned into a magma-covered wasteland. Good concept held back by not so good execution. So, after an admittedly neat final level, you finally reach Mustache Girl, and you fight her. The first phase is pretty annoying, but nothing terrible. But then, we get to hear the pleasure of hearing the words, "Get lost," over and over and over and over again. But I would have nothing to complain about the other two phases if it weren't for the absolutely horrendous visuals. Warning, those of you who are epileptic or prone to seizures, please look away now. The background is rapidly changing bright colors, which will give seizures to people who are sensitive to that. Why would they do such a thing? Anyways, after the second phase, now all the enemies that you beat in the game now sacrifice themselves after realizing that after they die it provides you with hearts that restore your health. I know this is a satire of those moments in video games where a lot of people give you the motivation you need to beat the final boss, but it just feels kind of forced. And then the last phase begins. And if the flashing lights in the second phase didn't hurt your eyes, in this phase they almost certainly will. Did the developers of this game even think of that? Haven't they heard of things like Electric Soldier Porygon or Problem Solvers? Even as someone who doesn't get seizures from this, my eyes still kind of hurt from it, and I've heard that these kind of seizures can kill people. That makes me really mad, and it would have been a lot higher, except this is the only thing in this finale that I can necessarily call horrendous. Alright guys, it's okay to look at the screen now. After winning, you get all your timepieces back and everything is back to normal. Except now you can get the choice if you can lend her one of the timepieces to help or just leave her. I know this is there to see if you believe in second chances or not, but your choice changes absolutely nothing other than a few seconds of animation. Then all the bad guys who helped you save the world beg you not to leave, and it seems that I really can't tell if it's supposed to be a satire or if it's supposed to actually be a sad scene because Hatkit using a broom to shove them off the spaceship makes it seem like a satire, but some other parts, including the music, make it seem like we're supposed to take it seriously. Especially after reading the comments on YouTube videos that showcase this ending. It's just so confusing. I get it, confusing is not the same as bad, but question, you want people to understand what's happening, right? If it's supposed to be a mixture of both, then they just cancel each other out and make it even more confusing. And if it's actually supposed to be a satire, then you can't make your audience actually feel bad for these characters. And then, on the end card, the implications of it could imply that this whole game was just a dream. All those gorgeous adventures you had probably never happened. This probably happened for real and wasn't a dream, but if it was, then it comes close to hurting this amazing game. Maybe if I understand this ending better, I'll probably regret putting this ending on the list, except for the flickering lights phase, but as of now, it's on here. As someone who loved the Subspace Emissary, I still have to say that its climax was not very good. Why is that? Well, first of all, the final boss doesn't get enough build-up. He just shows out of nowhere with no foreshadowing whatsoever, and turns everyone into trophies, meaning that we can't have as many cool character interactions during the finale. Sure, some trophies are revived, and you can revive the other trophies, and yeah, those give us 2 interactions between revived characters, but that's it. Also, you know what I love? How Ness, someone who no one knew before the original Smash, is required to be saved, but Mario, the mascot of gaming, is missable. What gives? Then of course we have the notorious Great Maze. Now, this level is a guilty pleasure of mine, because it brings back great memories of the Subspace Emissary, but even I think it's lazy that they pretty much had us play through the entire game all over again. It doesn't even feel like an intense build-up to the final boss fight. The last couple levels before this felt like they do a much better job at building to the climax. Not to mention, in the cutscene before the fight, this marks Sonic's only cutscene appearance in the Emissary, which I know is because he was put in late in Brawl's development, but wouldn't it have made more sense to have him as one of those post-game unlockable characters like Toon Link, Wolf, and Jigglypuff? But is the final fight bad? Well, no, but it's not really good either. And even after you beat him, you don't get much of an ending, other than the world being restored and everyone still models looking at the sunset, which is literally just recycled from the intro except slowed down. The ending could have felt much more complete, but instead we just got what a child could come up with. Let's hope Smash Ultimate Subspace Emissary ends on a better note. Ultimate's going to have a Subspace Emissary, right? Right? As I've told you before, I have a love-hate relationship with the Game Boy Advance version of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. The only reason I have a soft spot for it is because I grew up with it, but I eventually realized that this is a dumb game overall, because they don't explain things as well as the movie did, your potions don't heal you enough, and the finale is terrible. The last level is admittedly pretty decent, but there's no reason to split up, and you can't go back and buy more potions. Then again, I'm not sure you would even need that many potions, since the final boss is just a joke. Instead of having a boss fight against Dementors, this game's final boss is against Draco Malfoy. Great. This sucker is the final boss in the game from a series that's full of unimaginable types of monsters. Also, what the heck is Malfoy even doing here? No, seriously, how in the world did he manage to get up here? As for the fight itself, it's so easy that it's laughable. Despite being probably like triple your predicted level, his attacks do as much damage as most bosses, and he goes down way too quickly. What a wimp! And then, in the end, when you finally save Sirius Black, these bits of dialogue exchanged are really dumb. In the actual movie, this felt more emotionally satisfying, but it doesn't feel as good here. We don't even see some of the scenes that would have made this feel like a better ending. Harry and Hermione returning to their old time, saying goodbye to Lupin? I don't think so. As a result, this ending kind of feels somewhat unfinished. This is going to sound contradictory, but even though I do like Yoshi's New Island, I also kinda wish that it didn't exist. How come? Well, the main reason is because of the intro, which retconned the ending of the original game. Why? But since this is a list about finales, let's skip to the end. The final level overall is actually pretty fun, but once you get to the room before the boss, things start to get ugly. This room is literally a rehash of the room before the final boss in the original Yoshi's Island, with the auto-scrolling and how Kamek turns blocks into enemies. That's pretty much copy-pasted from the original. So is the fight going to be a rehash too? Unfortunately, yes. Both phases. Now imagine the patheticness of the first phase of the original final boss, except without the unique way of hitting him with ripples in the floor. Instead, we just throw eggs at him like normal, without anything else to it. But it gets worse. Now look at his second phase. Does this look anywhere near as intimidating as it did in the original game? Now, I understand he's roughly the same design. Well, the reason this worked so well in the original was because it had darker shading on him to make him look like a real monster. Also, unlike in the first game, which had the suspense of him getting closer and closer and threatening to destroy your platform, now he just stands there trying to shift your platforms, but they never go into the lava. But it turns out that it's not over after you beat him, because then the future Bowser comes in straight from out of nowhere, with no build-up whatsoever, but his fight isn't nearly as bad as the fight against Baby Bowser, since at least there's a little bit of suspense here, not to mention some more awesome boss themes. Anyways, after this fight, we get the exact same ending as we did in the original game, as the brothers finally reach their real parents in an, I guess, heartwarming scene. Even still, the first game did this better, at least before this game's intro ruined it. Now you're probably surprised that this is only number 16 on the list, considering last time I ranted about it. Well, after watching some of the Nostalgia Critics reviews, I realized something. Just because something is a horrible ripoff doesn't mean you have to think less of the thing that the ripoff is ripping off. In a way, this actually makes me appreciate the original final boss more when compared with this watered down version of it. This ending's bad, but at least it didn't retcon anything like the intro did, so I can still appreciate the original final boss. Still think this ending stinks though. Kingdom Hearts Recoded is pretty much just a retrend of the original Kingdom Hearts, except with less worlds and much less of a purpose whatsoever to the overall Kingdom Hearts continuity. But I guess I can appreciate some things, like the climax of the game. Even though it's dumb that Data Sora has to put not only his own life on the line, but also the real Sora's, and this could end up dooming all worlds, the fight against Anti-Sora is a pretty intense fight, with how many clones there are, and just how insane the battle becomes. Except for the last part, which promises an even more awesome phase, only to make us have to fight a puny little Shadow Heartless. But overall, this is a passable way to end this game.
Guys, big news. A new world has shown up inside the journal.
You've got to be kidding me. Our quest is still not over? Even after everything's already been wrapped up? That's right, the real final world is Castle Oblivion. Yup, now they're doing a retrend of a retrend. Why? Oh wait, this is Nomura we're talking about. The same nitwit who made a mobile game important to the franchise and might be deliberately trying to take a huge dump on Sora X carry shippers by pulling a Hermione Weasley on us. Even the level is pretty much a rehash of some of the stuff you've done throughout the game. Now, I ordinarily don't mind when video games rehash the past levels, because they allow you to reflect on what you've done throughout your adventures as you get closer to the end of the game. But we just finished going through one of these like not even an hour ago. And then after it all, the final boss of this game is Data Roxas. Someone who didn't have enough build-up, aside from being in pointless cutscenes that you're just going to end up forgetting about 5 minutes after they're over. As a matter of fact, the only reason I even knew this was the final boss when I first faced him was because I looked up a walkthrough on this game and it said that he was the final boss. The fight itself is a big difficulty spike because most of it is just dodge rolling constantly, and he keeps knocking you into the air and throwing you to the ground rapidly. And throughout this agonizing fight, the game wants you to feel sorry for Data Roxas, a character who is just a mere clone of the real Roxas, except this one has no tragic backstory or impact on the overall plot. And then we find out some glorious news that it was Namine who put all the bug blocks inside the journal because she thought it would make the real Sora understand the pain of his friend's memories or something. I don't know. This ending's just a giant mess and I barely even care about what actually happened. So next! I've talked about Tigger's Honey Hunt a couple times in the past. A game that I don't think anyone's talked about in the Countdown community aside from me, and probably for good reasons. It's kinda kiddie, and the stakes are pretty low, but at least it has charm to it. And even though the final level is pretty much just a rock, paper, scissors game, I can't really be mad at it since you wouldn't expect a game with this to have a huge climax. But that doesn't excuse what they do after all the trouble you've gone through. So, throughout the game, Tigger is on a big journey looking for honeypots for Pooh's party, and what do we get rewarded with?
I tried to help collect more pots, but he ate them all up already. So now, we don't have any for the party.
Please tell me I didn't hear what I thought I heard. This game is honestly telling us that we did all of that hard work, spending hours searching the entire 100-acre wood, for nothing. Even as a kid, this made me mad. Finding that all our work was in vain. Even if the game is kiddie, you have to make your kids feel like they actually accomplished something. Oh, but it's all okay in the end, since Christopher Robin just tells you that he has the solution to the problem by having a party like normal. So, that should make your kids feel better? No. No, it doesn't. Because we still went on a long journey for nothing. It's no wonder I haven't seen this appear in any top 10 list aside from my own. Doki Donkey should be ashamed of themselves for this ending, because this is not how you end off a game that helps to shape someone's childhood. The Pokemon Rescue Team games could have had a great ending. It's set up to be a huge tearjerker. After all the time you spent with your new friends, it's time for you to get your old life back and become human again, and say goodbye to all your friends that you've met throughout the game. It makes them really sad to see you go, but you have to. This is so beautiful! I can barely contain myself! Wait, what's going on? Oh no. Please tell me that you are not serious. You're having the character decide to stay as a Pokemon forever? Thanks a lot, game. You just destroyed what could have been an emotionally charged ending. Chunsoft, you're going in the direction of a near-perfect sad moment, but instead you just decided, nah, let's ruin it. Great idea! While you're at it, why don't you tell us that all the toys left Bonnie's house to go back to Andy's at the end of Toy Story 3? Yes, The game states that your new friends will be miserable forever without you. Well, guess what? A true friend would understand your reasonings and let you go. And here's my next problem with it. It says that if you get separated from your friends and family and another good family decides to take you in, and then when you finally have the chance to go back to your real parents and your real friends, you should just stay with your adopted ones and leave your old parents worried sick that you might be dead. That's one of the worst morals I've ever heard in a video game. Yes, it's sad to say goodbye to your friends, but it's either your old friends who are worried about you, or your new friends who know that you're alright. I've heard a defensive argument saying, oh blah blah blah, every game in the series does that. Well, you know what? That actually makes this worse. Doing this once is bad enough, but now everyone has to put up with this mood killer and terrible moral repeated through the entire Mystery Dungeon series. If this went in the other direction, this probably would have rivaled the number 3 entry of my saddest video game moments list for saddest Pokemon moment. But instead, the only sad part is that they ruined a great ending. If you like it, you're not wrong to your opinion, but please try to understand. A part of me really wants to hate Metroid Zero Mission, but at the same time, I feel like that would be unjustified. It pretty much does everything better than the first Metroid did, and the closest thing to a justifiable reason for me to hate the game is its unbelievably boring final level. So, after a terrible boss fight against Mother Brain, and successfully escaping from Turin, your mission is complete. Or so you thought. The space pirates now shoot down your starship, causing you to crash into Chozodia, and your power suit is ruined. So now you can play as Zero Suit Samus in the stealth mission. Now, the idea of losing all your abilities and having to resort to hiding is actually kind of a neat idea. What isn't awesome about the fear of not being spotted by far stronger enemies that can kill you quickly? How about we make it not feel all that suspenseful? Compared to the times where you have to hide from the SAX in this franchise's last major attempt at stealth missions, the music that plays in the mothership sounds kind of bland and generic. Hiding from the space pirates also feels somewhat tedious, especially since sometimes you think you're out of the line of sight only for them to suddenly attack you. And on the hardest difficulty, some of the save points are blocked off. There's a fine line between difficulty and cheap difficulty. The save points are now spaced too far apart, making this level even more repetitive than it already was to begin with. Then we get our next boss fight against Chozo Warrior Engraving. This one is far from fun because you have to shoot the mirror when the human symbol appears. When it has you on it, you take damage. Sometimes he changes it to you 1 microsecond before your laser hits it, and once he sends shockwaves onto the floor, jumping to dodge them won't help because you'll just end up jumping into him and taking damage. The only good thing about this fight is the music. Eventually you finally get your power suit back, and soon after, you reach the fight against Ridley Robot. It's not as bad as Mother Brain or the Chozo Warrior Engraving, but this boss had little to no build up. I will appreciate how they finally had a boss be a Ridley figure, and even then, it's no longer unique in that regard, since 13 years later we got the real Ridley as the final boss, which had no build-up, but at least it was more inspiring than this. Not to mention, Ridley Robot goes down with only 6 super missiles. I'm not even mad at that, that's just laughable. But he does get more health if you got all the power-ups, but that makes this fight completely dull, since 80% of this fight is you just space jumping against a wall avoiding attacks. Then we have the escape mission, which I'd have no complaints about if it weren't for the gauntlet of stronger space pirates at the end that are actually harder than the final boss. Once again, I can't hate a whole game because of one bad level, but I'd probably have more fond memories of the game if the ending wasn't so bland. You'd think that it would be impossible to find a bad ending in a Zelda game. Ever since Link to the Past, they've ended in a way that's either been epic, heart-wrenching, emotionally satisfying, or all 3, with the exception of the Oracle games. These games introduce 2 brand new villains. In Seasons, we get a power-hungry general who sent the seasons spiraling out of control, sunk an entire temple into the ground, and has a dragon as his final form, let alone one of the biggest dragons Link has ever faced. Meanwhile, Ages give us an awesome sorceress with the power to shapeshift, possess her victims into doing what she wants. She enslaved dozens of workers and twisted the fabric of time. These 2 seem like they'd make perfect main antagonists. But unfortunately, it turns out that they're not the main villains of the games after all. They're just mere tools being used by Kotaki and Kaum in order to light the flames of destruction and sorrow in order to complete their ritual to resurrect Ganon, which is also kind of a weird idea. I know other games in the Zelda series have also had villains end up being no more than just mere puppets being used to resurrect Ganon, but at least the twists with them weren't as insulting because you'd at least expect that by this point. And if you're going to argue that we can't have everything we want in life, that's not an excuse. What's worse, Onyx and Varan had to die in order for the flames to be lit. That means those awesome villains didn't even get to use their full power against us. So now you need to go to the Room of Rights to stop them, and the Room of Rights isn't even an inspiring dungeon. You know why? Because instead of building up suspense like an actually good Final Zelda dungeon would do, this one is just a series of rooms where everything looks the exact same, and you need to find the right path. As for the final fight, it's okay, but we have much higher standards for a final boss in the Zelda game. When combined with the rest of the finale, it does not do it any justice. Especially since the witches were forced to sacrifice themselves to resurrect Ganon, and they could only bring him back as a mindless monster. But because they didn't explain the whole mindless monster thing until after you beat Ganon, the fight doesn't have as much suspense to it. This is exactly why they should have just left Ganon alone when making this game. Oh great, the number one entry on one of my negative countdowns involves Bowser. This will definitely end well considering last time this happened. I better get the anti-Bowser fanboy repellent on and hope it works. Anyways, Mario and Luigi Dream Team. One of the most wasted Mario games in the world because it had so much potential and yet it squandered it. Probably the worst part of the game is its finale. The final level is Neo Bowser Castle. Even though Phantasma is this game's signature villain, they still have to have him get overshadowed by Bowser throughout the whole game. The finale is probably the worst example of this. This is Bowser's castle, and aside from these Nightmare Thorn things, it doesn't really feel like an Phantasma castle. Even the enemy selection is biased. There are like 10 Bowser enemies and only 2 Phantasma enemies. Also, you fight Kamek 3 times, each one not feeling that much different from the previous fight, except for when he clones himself, and when he gets this broom attack that even a 3rd grader could dodge with no problem. The level itself gets stalled too. While it has some nice moments, do you want to know how long this level takes? Take a guess. 4 hours. Even the world that never was isn't even half that length. And throughout it, you're pretty much doing the same thing you've done throughout the rest of the game, most of it which has already gotten dull by this point, considering the amount of pointless padding in Dream Team. There's also the atrocious fight against Giant Bowser, which if you saw my least favorite bosses revision that I made a couple months ago, you'd know that I can't stand how predictable and insulting his attacks are, and how the bumper car section of the fight has slippery controls that make Rise of Lyrics controls look precise. Eventually you reach Phantasma and Bowser, and we get one of the worst plot twists in the series. It is revealed that this whole time, Bowser was the main villain. We could have had this game's main antagonist be an awesome Bat King of Nightmares, but nope, instead it's the same villain who's always been the main villain. Before you argue that, oh, it would have been too predictable. Sometimes it's better to be predictable than to have an anticlimactic ending, because at least predictable endings can still be intense at times. The fight against Phantasma was good, well except for him eating the orbs which just looked dumb, but everything else is even more proof that Phantasma should have been the final boss. The majority of Phantasma's moves look absolutely evil, especially when he traps you in a nightmare where you might have to put up with torture chambers. So, what does Bowser give us? Well, he has a Dreamstone that grants all his wishes, but then Peach and Starlo are forced to destroy it using these laser beams. Could it be Peach actually does something useful? Maybe that could make up for her once again being kidnapped. I wish. But it doesn't matter. Bowser just inhales the Dreamstone's fragments to absorb its power, thus ruining the only useful thing Peach did in the entire game. And what does Bowser do with this source of awesome power? He decides to play the flip a coin game, cover his head, summon multicolored versions of his lousy minions, and the best part, eating a bunch of meat in the middle of the fight. But that's how he healed in the last game. I don't care. It still ruins the suspense of the battle. Now I know how the people who fought Jasper Bat Jr. feel. And the fight itself is just downright cheap, with how long it takes to beat his minions to get him out of the background as he continues to ruin the mood of the fight. The admittedly epic music actually makes me hate this battle even more because of how insulting it is to hear a theme this epic being wasted on the dumbest final battle ever. After the fight, it seems like the Dreamstone might be able to be restored, except it's restored as coins, because you can use them to make your dreams come true or something. So, can everyone still dream in the Pillow Kingdom? Or is this one of those stupid metaphorical things? I am hoping for the former, but whether it's the former or latter, that doesn't change the fact that I personally think this is the worst finale in any game I've played. I am Matter527 II, and Dream Team is my new least favorite Mario & Luigi RPG game.